Oh yeah, priming effects. I read somewhere that the order of names on that ballot paper is important. The first name, just by virtue of being listed first, gets, I think it was about 5 or 6% lift in voting. Something like that. Might be more, might be less, but point is, it's not insignificant. Enough to win an election by. So yeah, obviously never position yourself, if you're up for the job of being prince, as contemptible or despised because of these traits. Your decisions must be final. You have not got time to do a redo, and God forbid you flip-flop. Your reputation has to be solid. If people are to get behind you, they must know that you will not falter in hard times and leave them out in the cold. You must see it through always. You might be right, you may be wrong, but just never be in doubt. With a solid reputation, domestic threats such as rebellion and conspiracy are minimised. With a strong army, foreign threats are minimised. Stability is achieved. All that from posturing. It's cheap. In the first example, a conspirator or a rebellion requires at least one other, which puts the originator in a kind of prisoner's dilemma. The second would-be conspirator might win extra favour from the prince by entrapping the first. The reward sufficient for the second to get all his wants met, and at zero cost, since the originator will be less ahead. The possibility of retribution is all but negligible. It makes the proposition of instigating a rebellion rather risky, and the more people involved, the greater the risk. We've learned over the years of many despicable state-sanctioned infiltrations. Spies, man. Industrial espionage, social engineering, false flag ops, double, triple agents, paid informants, yeah, all that good stuff. Again, the choice between fear and love and praise. Fear of being apprehended in the conspiracy, or praise and reward for and protection from the state for zero risk of grassing up the original conspirator. It's a no-brainer. And to have special attention and favour of the prince, probably how the Stasi worked. As an informer, you have power and control over the fate of others. It's petty. But this is it. This is how it works. It seems we're just so jealous of others who apparently are having a good time that we think they must be doing something dodgy somewhere, and we want ours, or at least to have more than them, and so we leave anonymous tips to the taxman or social services or child protection services. Is it petty, or is it just me? I'm just too fucking lazy. I don't care. Just don't take the piss too much, or if you do, make sure I don't find out. Keep it to yourself. I'm a crap liar, should anyone come a-knocking. Speaking of brainers and no-brainers and lots of brains, at least one person has tried to prove, using brains, that the revolutionary movements were madness. And such information would surely be of great value to the elites. And should this have been proven true, this person themselves would now have their ticket to be in that circle. Yeah, grifting for the establishment. A bit like PragerU. Fucking hell. Dim Pool. Fuck off. Stefan Molyneux. Off. JPW. Fucking hell. Myelinopolis, another one who's fallen. Nothing new under the sun. So this chap, Liban, tried. Big heads, he reasoned. Big brains. Big brains, more rationality, less hysteria, he reasoned. Vice versa. Need I point out, as Liban did, on average, women have smaller brains than men. So yeah, that's probably how it all got started. Liban did concede that occasionally a woman of note would come along, but he hand-waved such anomalies as birth defects. A man's brain in a woman's body, no doubt, and as such, he maintained his claim. Seems Liban was willing to sell out, debase and dehumanise his fellow humans for a seat at the elite's table. Perhaps more psychotic than Machiavellian. Turns out his ideas were ridiculed by the scientific community. I wonder if he had himself a small head. Of course, like many a modern-day conspiracy theorist, he doubled down and by proudly stating that he was not a member of the scientific community, he was free of their thinking, free of their faith and bias, thus adding narcissism too to his methods of ambition. Almost a dark triad. I'm poking fun, obviously, but it was whatever. Fucking grifters. Unfortunately, the crowd. It is true that the crowd is more often influenced with rhetoric than logic, facts and reason. As to the reasons why, doesn't really matter, does it? Anyway, even if conspirators are successful in the coup and kill the prince and family, they face the potential wrath of the community at large. We're kind of seeing this one played out on the world stage right now. That was quite a turnout for the Iranian commander's funeral. It's a very different situation over there culturally. It just works differently in ways we in the West typically don't understand. Might come back to this point. Suffice to say that which is not understood is put in the category of the unknown. That which is unknown is put in the category of that which is to be feared. The organisations on screen, I don't want a video clipped, have a substantial network and far-reaching force projection. There's a dozen more we've never heard of, but this is their deterrent. We label them terrorist organisations. Instead, we have nuclear weapons. Yeah, it's not so personal and close up as a knife. We'll get onto that when we look at Dave Grossman's book. But the point I'm making is their reaction to things, it's similar but different. They are, well, it's de-escalated now, but they were reacting just like the president was reacting. They were, they have their deterrent and we have ours. It looks very different. We don't really understand how theirs works. We just have a big stick. They have all these, what we might call sleeper cells. Yeah, it just works different. Anyway, Machiavelli cautions that when things are good, and we've already talked about this, and the prince is respected and revered, generally conspiracy threats are low, but when things turn sour, he must fear everyone and everything. In this, Machiavelli advises, keep the nobles happy and the people content. A potentially horrible juggling act, and what's imperative is not to be despised or hated. Should you, or the prince, find this too burdensome an act, well, manifest an intermediary institution, let them take the blame. Task this intermediary with the horrible and distasteful jobs. Keep the pleasant ones that will win you favour with the people. I see the X Factor again, kind of talked about how that works, and see Warren and her newfound enthusiasm. Keep the nobles happy, the military in check, and leave the people in peace. So, a little snippet came out in the Wall Street Journal. Quote, Trump's new nation security team made fast work of Iran's strike. Tiny section, third page. Mr. Trump, after the strike, told associates he was under pressure to deal with General Soleimani from GOP senators he views as important supporters in his upcoming impeachment trial in the Senate. Wow. If true, then the questions were, what were the nobles or senators up to that requires the removal of a foreign official in a foreign country? Who are the nobles trying to please? Is this a classic case of wag the dog? Here again, Machiavelli had some advice for us. If things are turning south and you have to be hated or despised, make it so that it's the smallest or least powerful demographic, the marginalised, the vulnerable, the poor. Make sure that those are the groups, if any, that has to hate you or despise you, if he must. It's a really sad story. Be wary of assuming the role of prince or CEO of a previously undisciplined state or corporation. This is for you, Pence. If the army were taking liberties or the executives were doing naughty things, corruption, cronyism, nepotism, to curb their fun and criminality will win you no favours. In this scenario, if you wish to survive, you have to not do the good thing, but do the other thing. Whether it's a corrupted nobility or army or peoples, your longevity is proportional to your ability to align with their inclinations. And this is what's going to make Pence's position untenable if Trump is removed under impeachment. He won't have any real support, he won't have any kind of legitimacy. You're right, legally, yeah, but it's just not going to work. As noted, the prince must be sly and shrewd, but also a beast and a cruel man, according to the inherited institution and their inclinations. Remember the slippery slope, showing cowardice, flim-flam, effeminacy, frivolity, uncertainty and doubt is the path to being despised. Unduly taking property, sustenance and family members leads to being hated. Either is contemptuous, and violent death soon follows for such a prince. And to the question of safeguarding the state, fortresses, armies, armed militia or not. First thing then, when taking the reins of power, arm your subjects. What does Buffett say? Give people a fine reputation to live up to, motivate them, allocate capital. I've come to realise this is the oblique approach that Machiavelli talks about right out of Rhetorica. Instead of telling people to do good things, give them a fine reputation so that they have to make that true by doing good things. The reciprocation bias. This act installs loyalty. Giving them arms, trusting them with those arms. They become partners rather than employees or subjects. As for their elevation in status, they feel an extra obligation. Some you just won't be able to arm. But because of those you have endeared with trust and arms, you are so protected by that herd. This hierarchy will provide many levels of autonomy and protection through which bad actors must go to reach you. Each level will protect you, since that is in your defence. It is an act to protect their own interests. It's a kind of self-protecting hierarchy that they have their position to protect, which inherently protects the next one up from them, which ultimately protects you. Plus, an armed population will be a deterrent to any potential invasion force. I'm not sure that I'm necessarily advocating for an armed citizenry. I don't know. Depends. But disarming them or removing their capital, allocating autonomy, says what? And you either trust people or you do not. There's no kind of middle ground. There's no flim-flamming on this. This just pisses everyone off and makes it look like that either someone has the dirt on you, or someone gave you a bribe, or you're not making your own decisions, or someone's got your ear and talked you out of making a decision, and that equally looks flim-flammy. Either way, it's contemptible, it's cowardly, it's indecisive, and shows lack of loyalty to the rest. Under this condition, whether the armed people pissed off or a rebellious executive, what do you do? Well, hire in the mercenaries or outside consultant managers. That just pisses people off even more. It's the old consultant management joke, isn't it? Somewhat flippant, is that they will tell you what you already know to be true and charge you sufficiently for the privilege. But against an incalcitrant workforce or dissident population, outside contractors, can't. It's a tough one. What about mergers and acquisitions then? So you've annexed a new state. Yeah. Here, you've got to disarm the new acquisition, except for those who were your partners in crime and assisted in the acquisition, your inside players. You can't take away trust after those parties delivered. Keep the old guard close too. Live in your old estate, commute if you have to. To up and leave so easily shows contempt and disloyalty for the old state, shows you couldn't wait to leave that dump for something better. This is contemptible. Keep in mind, while integration is occurring, you are weak to external forces. Machiavelli makes mention that agitating a bit of friction between new factions is a bad idea and shows immaturity in such a prince who does such a thing. If his only means of keeping control is by having his divided empire fight itself, he is inept. When war comes, and there is infighting in your providence, it's a dicey situation. One or both factions may side with the invading force. However, war is the name of the game, so agitating the enemy and inviting them to misstep, to create an opportunity and justification to seize more states, is totally valid. Invite them to break the law, invite them to overextend themselves, provoke them, test them. Do they react or respond? The difference is critical to know. Well, Bob Iger agitated George Lucas, I think. I still maintain that it was actually Steve Jobs that agitated Bob Iger into buying Pixar. Puts a whole new spin on it, don't it? Some people are just operating on levels way out there. It's hard to reach, let alone fathom. I don't know how far we got into Disney War when we were talking about Bob Iger. But I don't know whether we mentioned what was going on under Eisner's rule at Disney. There was divisiveness and information control, keeping parties separated, executive infighting. Executive wouldn't turn up to board meetings if they knew another executive was going to be there. There was general mistrust, culture clashes, power struggles, contempt all over the place. Disney almost collapsed. And in their weakened state, well, the relationship with the animators was so poor. Films were jeopardised. The Pixar relationship ground to a halt, and Comcast was making bids during Disney's weakened state. Rightly so, Eisner was fired. Machiavelli also made mention of something I've seen a few times. A newly promoted manager make a fuss and a dance about some issue or other, then miraculously fix the problem. Yeah, I can't see it for what it is, showboating. People know it, they know inauthenticity when they see it. But if the prince can actually cunningly agitate some issue that he can later suppress, he does confirm his position rightfully. Boris. But do this transparently and obviously, and you look like a complete dickhead, Boris. It's contemptible. Something I've seen firsthand too. Some people just love for you to be won over by their charm. This is a similar thing. You kind of spot the people who are approval junkies. Their body language gives it away. It's the disinterested stare, the yawn, the leaning back in the office chair, hands clasped behind their heads as they yawn. Showing their teeth really is what it is. It's a bit of a giveaway. They're overdoing the indifference. They're really saying, prove to me that you are a worthy prince. They're saying, I'm pretending not to notice you, but look at me pretending not to notice you. They're pretending that you are not a threat to them. But we cannot appease them or assure them so easily. We have to fight them a little bit, pretend we are suspicious of them, treat them as though they are dangerous, create an incident for them where their loyalty is secretly tested, only we know it's a contrivance. Finally confirming their trust. Make sure they know we've spent considerable time evaluating their so special and unique ways. Only then do we finally all but announce to them that actually we can see great value and potential in them. So then we give them a real test of responsibility. Meanwhile, we've already allocated resource and projects to everyone else. They've just not noticed because they're so up in themselves doing this little act. They're so wrapped up in their own seeking of approval and basking in it that they don't see they're the last one in the race. But after their confirmation, after that, they just can't wait to get closer to power. You get great utility from these people. They will do anything for that. One last warning on threat assessments, and I suppose the equivalent is the modern-day management buyout. Machiavelli describes a situation whereby you, the new prince, has used confederates of the target acquisition, insiders, to insist in the seizing of that state or corporation. One should understand the motivation behind such actions. If it's because they really like you, it's going to be okay. If it's because they're disgruntled with the situation, be wary. They may already be talking to the next would-be prince if things don't change. You should assess whether that much change to appease the insiders will upset the masses of people to a point where you are despised. It's one of those opportunities of tension. Can you pull it off? Can you appease everyone? Can you? On defence and fortresses, Machiavelli's advice is if the prince fears the people more than foreigners, build a fortress. If he fears foreigners more than his people, do not build a fortress. Fortresses will not save the prince if he is hated by the people. Such people always find foreigners to assist them. Same message, don't put the people in a position where they have contempt for you. However, being a most excellent leader and extraordinary does win a prince's esteem. Make much ado about exceptional events, good or bad. It will provoke much discussion. Borders, immigration, big walls, television license fees, big issues that affect us all in our day-to-day experiences. Short-term thinking, distractions, all that. Above all, strive to achieve being someone of outstanding intelligence. Do you recall the early cries, "I have a high IQ"? Bless him. Again, the error was directly stating it. It makes it a focused thing in the minds of listeners, something for which that proclamation can later be checked against and used as evidence against the prince, when in poor times it turns out not to be true. Instead, use the oblique approach. Say something like, it's perhaps true that a wise man once said whatever they said, and we would all do well if we came anywhere close to that. And with the vicissitudes of life, we will falter occasionally in the endeavour. Only the wisest of us planned for this. Sounds grandiose, people filling the meaning. Yeah, you sound smart, but you haven't actually claimed it. A measure of a prince is the calibre of both his friends and enemies. As astute politicians know, and right-wing YouTube grifters know, you've got to declare your camp. Going for neutral is meek. Game theory. You've got to pick one side. Consider two parties, A and B, and you declare admiration for one and contempt for the other. If some reason A and B go toe-to-toe, there will be a winner. In which case you will have cause to fear the victor, or not. In the case where you remain undeclared or neutral, the winner will look to prey upon you, to the loser's delight, I might add. No one will have reason to assist you. Whoever wins does not want reluctant allies who would not offer support in times of adversity, nor especially in times of triumph. Whoever loses will not offer you sanctuary, since you are not willing to run the risk of sharing in their fortune. It will always happen that he who is not your friend will request your neutrality, and he who is your friend will ask you to disclose your intentions by taking up arms. Irresolute princes follow the neutral path most of the time, and are ruined. When the prince declares himself energetically in favour of one side and they win, they have an obligation to the prince and a bond of affection. And should that side lose, Machiavelli says, the prince will be obliged to offer shelter. But this comradeship in disaster grows stronger bonds, and over time that alliance may eventually grow powerful. This Machiavelli is really talking risk analysis, and to identify the lesser of evils. Be resolute, be a careful decision maker, and get those decision trees done. War games, payoff matrices, and you must not ever make a decision that emboldens or empowers a foreign power. This should be obvious. I wonder what Trump was thinking. Iran has been handed the moral high ground, and if it were any other country, the international community would be rallying behind them. As it is, Iraq has asked the US to leave, which has eroded the last 15 years of efforts, blood, lives and foreign policy in that region. Never put yourself in a position to be in someone else's mercy or charity. It has to be your foundation. This seems strangely familiar and necessary for my own personal comfort. It has to be on my terms. It's something I've learned the hard way. It has to be my show. Using someone else's power base is awkward. It's full of conflict. you don't have full authority, you're not fully responsible, you're in this quasi-position of wielding unaccountable power. It's kind of weird. It confuses people because they start asking, well, who's in charge? It's just weird. Anyway, yeah, you can't rely on the luck or generosity of others. In war and in serious business, this kind of behaviour is contemptible. Machiavelli strongly urges against alliances with stronger powers to get together to injure third parties. Upon success, the prince will be prisoner of the winner, uncomfortably and forever subordinated. So, what's Boris's plan? At this time of writing, early January 2020, to negotiate with the US and EU simultaneously. That's his plan. As if the UK has two crack teams of negotiators. The UK has not negotiated any trade deal independently for quite some time now, and here we are negotiating not with one power superior to the UK, but two at the same time. What kind of fucking plan is that? As if the EU and US would be played off against one another. I mean, who the fuck wants us? There is an answer to that, and it's not possibly the US. And I suspect it's conditional too on access to things like the NHS. Is our only chip on the table? The EU cannot weaken the integrity of their single market for any benefit that the UK could possibly bring. On the flip side, the US refused to do any deal with the UK if the UK does a deal with the EU. The US conditions stipulate a trade deal with the UK that's mutually exclusive to the EU. If we sign on the US deal, there will be border checks in the Irish Sea. Further, the US will not compromise on its need to export goods which currently do not meet UK standards. Further, with a US deal, if those border checks do not occur between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, then checks will have to take place between Northern Ireland and the Republic. And that breaches the Good Friday Agreement, which, due to pressure from the Irish in America, Congress has agreed will not participate in such a deal. So, my interpretation of this situation, applying the Machiavellian rubric, is we be fucked. How exactly is this ploy of playing one off against the other going to occur when the UK has to ask the impossible from both trading blocs? Fear not, perhaps the UK Tory government has read The Prince a little further. Machiavelli states, all decisions will be risky. It is the order of things. Nor should any state believe it can always choose the safe course of action. Well, this is taking it to an extreme, two impossible positions. Machiavelli's advice is knowing how to recognise the nature of disadvantage and choose the least worst option. Wow, you tell me. We already got the best deal. Correction, had. Then there's a small matter of threatening Europe with 25% tariffs on car imports unless they trigger the dispute mechanism contained in the Iran nuclear deal. Well, our American friends may well make do without Mercedes, BMWs, Audis, Aston Martins, Bentleys, but this is alienating of all allies and reneging on deals and agreements. Why would anyone now enter into a good faith agreement with the US? And just as a side note, in regard to the UK, these exports to Europe are also under stress from Brexit. So yeah, double whammy. And therein lies the question, isn't it? Nissan leaving, Vauxhall leaving, Mini, Toyota, Honda, Ford. Oh dear. I fear for the next few years. Closing out then, Machiavelli urges the prince to recognise and honour those who excel at some skill on his checklist and encourages subjects to pursue their craft, work skills in whatever form that takes. Do not set up poor incentives that stifle growth or enterprise. Commerce is the nature of growing the trust res, the estate, the state. Citizens should be encouraged to enterprises that increase the wealth and benefit of the commonwealth. Yep, check. Create a structure and calendar of dates that synchronises commercial activities. Keep the citizens amused with festivals, Netflixes, but do imaginative things in the corporate setting beyond those fucking team building weekends away. Spread yourself around a bit. Machiavelli suggests forming guilds or divisions of smaller numbers so that you can mingle with these special interest markets and infuse your values and beliefs as an exemplar of the culture you are driving in a more direct and distilled manner. Show them how it's done. In the closing chapters of Machiavelli's The Prince, we are advised about selecting our advisors. Oh, fuck. Trump's Russia advisor has been escorted from the White House premises. And this is early news as of time of recording, so I don't know how that's panned out in the recent days or weeks since you're listening to this. So, what's the deal? Andrew Peake was a leftover from the Obama administration, so did he fall through the cracks and Trump only just noticed that and got rid of him? Or was he a Russian spy? Or was he not in cahoots for Putin? Hard to tell. But the significant thing is, this position is now vacant for the third time in the year. I remember we mentioned previously about continuity in general knowledge and specialist knowledge. A wise prince will have a cadre of capable and loyal advisors. It shows him to be discerning and have the ability to recognise talent, sophistication, experience, and having been effective in fostering an environment where such influential persons also remain loyal. A real player. So, current crisis in Iran-Iraq. How shall the US respond to Iran's missile attacks? Well, perhaps the US president ought to have his best advisors at hand to tell him the information that he doesn't know that he needs to. Well, perhaps the first on that short list will be the Secretary of the Navy. Currently that office has been vacant since November the 24th. Contemptible. Not to worry. Let's move down the list. How about the Director of Intelligence? That post is technically vacant too. Never mind, let's go down the list, stride the third position. Homeland Security Secretary. Oh dear, technically vacant. What the fuck is going on? I've got to ask, is this wise? Is it a trust issue or an ego thing? Fucking hell. Has the continuity of the chain of command been broken? Who's in charge? Who's giving orders? Who's coming up with these plans and contingency plans? And who's trying to keep up with all the dynamic changes that have been fired out by tweet? It's a shit show. Is there a plan? Who's making these decision trees? What's the goal or exit plan? Machiavelli gets specific on the type of advisors. It's kind of obvious. You want smart people. People who can figure shit out on their own. Those not available, you want people who can discern what others understand. Then there's the third kind, which seems to be the current political choice, and this is the intelligence that neither understands by itself nor through others. This kind of intelligence is useless. Machiavelli offers us recruitment advices, filter for the minister who talks about and works on and is obsessed with the state and the welfare of the prince as a close second. Should the minister put their own affairs first, get rid of them. Machiavelli says to get the optimal ministers vested in the position, ensure that via prudent execution of their office they will become rich and have a lavish office that they will lose should things change. Ensure they want for nothing, as such they will not be holden to others or open to bribery or such collusion or have conflicts of interest leveraged by debts. They will behave and trust each other. When they are otherwise, the outcome will be harmful. I have to ask, in regard to Trump's de-escalation with Iran, did someone point out that should all those buildings around the world with Trump written on the top of them become targets? This may well be a devastating blow to his property empire. I suspect the emoluments clause is there for a good reason. Of course, the Trump name is just that, it's a branding thing. I don't think he owns the buildings, I could be wrong, but nevertheless, it's an obvious target. So, something has clearly gone awry. It would seem to me that many take advantage of the revolving door of government and private sector, get rich from outside interests, and then no longer are they beholden to the office and the interests of state as a source of their own income. Independently wealthy, they can just fuck off the system, mistrust each other, and become more polarised and exploitative. Lobby groups, yeah, them too. Machiavelli talks about flattery. Fuck off with that bullshit. Make it clear you will not be injured by the truth of matters. However, you can't have anyone just come up to you, the prince, and start giving you some home truths. No one respects a prince that would allow that. Instead, only your designated inner circle gets to do that, but only when they are invited to do so, and only on matters of your inquiry. You need the space for willful ignorance. Apart from this, listen to no one. Be of single mind, of purpose, focus, and remember, 3 priorities is all you get. Too much noise, too many opinions across those 4th, 5th, or 6th priorities is only distracting. You will only change your mind in the face of different opinions. Unsolicited advice should be discouraged, but the prince will ask many high-quality questions. But be aware of the question disclosure model. See Facebook group for more details. The questions you ask give away your plans. Any hesitation in response or reluctance to questions from the prince should be a cause for concern. Paradoxically, the value of the advice provided by the advisors results from the prudence of the prince. Ensure the advisors are capable and doing their fucking job, and that they are asked the highest quality questions. Be precise though, and then make decisions quickly and implement policy. A friend, former SAS type, once told me, "John, there's no such thing as bad weather, just poor choice in clothing." Machiavelli administers similar sentiments. Just because things are calm now doesn't mean it'll always be so. Have appropriate clothing on standby. You will need it eventually. You don't control the weather, only the clothes you put on. And do not abandon things only as a last resort. No one will be there to pick up after you. And even if they are, warns Machiavelli, you are at the whim of others' charity then, which, like the weather, can change at any moment. And that change, observes Machiavelli, is in alignment with Bob Iger's assessment. Mostly just dumb luck, things will happen, circumstances way beyond our information horizon will affect us in ways that we can't possibly know. Machiavelli likens this to a raging torrent. If you can ride it, do so. Be prepared for when it comes. They occasionally do. Pick the biggest one that you can ride. Going for the big ones, too big too soon, can be calamitous. But these waves of technology, waves of other innovations, waves of cultural upheaval, Arab Spring for example, zero interest rates, they change the landscape irrevocably. Things will not be the same when the water recedes. Only a few will be left standing. Ride the market, the trend is your friend. Apply the policies and actions appropriate to the underlying conditions. Don't fight the market, man. And curiously, on advice, I've studied a few self-proclaimed traits of many a successful person. About 50 who divulged their success secrets. It's kind of schizophrenic. For each one that said do it this way, there was one who said do it that way. One says go big, the other says go small, go long, go short, go all in, little and often, do both, pick one. Machiavelli's observation is the same. Times and circumstance change such that it is true for one person going long is appropriate, for another in a different place and time going short was appropriate. Your history and experience has to be forged from the time in which you lived it. It has to be your foundation, plus also confirmation bias. Of course we like to take pride in the decisions that we made, that we believe brought about all those things. So oftentimes it was good dumb luck, but we tell a good story. It goes way back now to a couple of hours ago when we listed those 7 secrets of highly successful people. Yes, mostly dumb luck. You had 2 choices both of them led to the inevitable outcome because circumstances beyond your control. Think about it. How compelling is the self-help book or guru who sells a message that has as its only text, "Be lucky"? Sure. You need to have the vision to see the luck when it arrives, and then have to have the nous to know what to do with it once you've seen it. And then you have to know how to manage those yields and grow the business or empire. And I have to pause for a little bit of thought here. Do we really know ourselves that well to be able to say this was the decision that led to that, rather than I was a victim of circumstance? Some of the best decisions I made were on the flip of a coin. I just held fast and promised whatever came up I would do. I think shortly after reading Luke Reinhardt's book, The Dice Man. Turns out Luke Reinhardt was a pen name, added humour. Yeah, so is it a means to an end, or is it a response, or is it merely a reaction that we had? It turns out psychopaths tend to plan more this way, and it's been said psychopaths seem to be overrepresented in the CEO population. But those psychos who went the other way and ended up in jail, who've done murders, when they are asked to talk about their murders, there is, or it has been noticed, that they have a common language that describes their acts in terms of causal links. They say things like because and had to and therefore needed to. There's a kind of logical chain of causality. It's a rational process. The non-psychos who did murders seem to be more reactionary. So I have to kind of ask, given the choice, which would we prefer? At least with a psycho, there seems to be rhyme and reason and intent, rules by which they live, and it's conceivable that if we keep them away from those conditions, they'll never execute that plan. However, the reactionaries, the normies, who do murders, well, they just seem totally unpredictable, and they should probably stay behind bars. But I wonder who actually gets longer sentences. Yes, it is actually the psychopaths. What does that say about the rationale of the sentencing committees? Another observation with the psychos is their recollection of the heinous crimes. They tend to talk more about the incidentals, what they ate that day or what they had to drink. Some have made the observation and connection that they talk about those things lower down on the Maslow needs hierarchy. Talk about money, intangibles, definite articles, grounded things, whereas the non-psycho murderers, it's been observed, talk about much higher level of abstractions, spirituality, religion, family, retribution, some kind of justice thing. So yeah, the psychopaths tend to have a more mechanistic needs fulfilling intent. This seems to support the notion that for the psychopathic murderers, it is all about meeting the ends or the outcome. More than anything else, it's not about an emotional response, it's not about a reaction, it's a cold and calculated thing to bring about an end. Yeah, back to that question. So I wonder if this is why lots of teams are working on these kind of artificial algorithms that go searching the blogosphere for everything we've ever written, and they do all these profiling. I mean, they've got Crystal Nose out there. A lot of the dating agencies use these technologies now to spot potential future psychopaths, and they ghost them, which brings into somewhat of a kind of ethical issue. Ghosting, by the way, is where when the psychopath logs in, who's been flagged, they'll log in, their account will look all normal, it'll look like it's been exposed to the world, but actually no one's seeing their profile. The administrators of the site have blocked their profile, but they're still getting charged, but no one will ever see their profile. So they're paying for a service that they're not getting. So yeah, there's these technologies that can search the whole blogosphere and do your profile. I wonder if this is why the fuzz likes to get hold of your phone while investigating serious matters. And they analyse and scrutinise and look for anything incriminating or anything that can be used to discredit and humiliate. And I'm talking about the victim's phone here. As the warning goes, anything you do say can be used as evidence against you, but if you do not say anything, yeah, well, we'll look into what you have said online and we'll use that too. It's getting quite complicated, isn't it? Machiavelli warns us too to stay in our wheelhouse. Play to our skills, our values, our beliefs and identity. Deviating may get us into another lane, but we will not be able to maximise it as much as when we were in our lane. And especially as when our lane suddenly becomes trendy or in vogue or some fad hits, we're better able to maximise it because we're familiar with it. Likewise, if our current path is profitable, we will know one day it will come to an end, and therefore we must jump lanes into new pathways that are not exhausted and offer new promise. When rapid change is required, the cautious will miss opportunity and are ruined. Adapt to the up-and-coming conditions. Sometimes patience is the method. Sometimes impetuous aggression is the way. How to know to do which is impossible to say. That said, Machiavelli suggests it's better to be impetuous than cautious. Interestingly, he also recognises that younger men are less risk-averse and, in some kind of hindsight bias, realises that lady luck favours young men. Again, it just means younger people. But that's a mindset thing, I think. We tend to be more conservative as we age, but it doesn't have to be so. Plus also, young men have more time to correct any mistakes or to earn back any losses than older men or women. So there's kind of survivor's bias in effect. You might just get lucky on your first go, probably not. But if you're lucky at 20, make your millions, retire at 25, great. If you suddenly decide at 55 life is boring, take a risk and you just happen to get it right and retired by 60, it's the same thing. It's just, one's got more time to enjoy it than the other. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it could be that way. The young kid could keep trying and trying and trying and trying for whatever reason. And it might just have been as well off staying in bed for 20 years. But, as this saying goes, every lottery winner bought a ticket, but not every person who buys a ticket is a lottery winner. So we're coming to the end now that we're on the home stretch. It's been insightful. It's been a few years since I'd read The Prince. I've not really had much practical chance to implement it, but it certainly made a lot more sense the second time around. First time it was, this is all kind of weird and conceptual, but having a few years of experience between then and now, it's like, yes, I've seen this play out. And you can suddenly connect the dots to reality, start grounding that difference between the kind of ideological frameworks and the actual day-to-day nitty-gritty of it all. Good to get topical examples in there too. Fascinating now looking at politics and how, because of things like, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube's, we get to see a little bit more, not necessarily even honesty from the person speaking, but commentary, other people commenting on it, the kind of truth of the matter arises, and then you can start to see the bloody stupid games they're playing. What really struck me, I think I made the comment when we did Bob Iger, is how, when I read Disney War, it was just like kids playing in the schoolyard. And there's a video I watched recently with, they still hold the title president, even though they're not president anymore, but they hold the title. President Obama pretty much said the same thing, said, people go around thinking that power and all this responsibility is some big thing, but he said a little bit tongue-in-cheek, basically it's the same schoolyard kind of argy-bargy. You look around, there's arseholes everywhere. You work your way up through the hierarchy, you look around and it's the same arseholes, and eventually you get to the top and it's the same arseholes. I think he concluded something along the lines of all you really need to know you can get from reading Dr. Seuss. I presume he's talking about morals and ethics, in which case, I think those books are pretty good. The Lorax. Yeah, good warning there. So, next I'm going to see if I can get through the book called How to Get Elected, How to Win an Election. Then I'm going to wander off into conflict resolution, see what comes up in the next few weeks. I wonder what Brexit will happen between now and then. Boris, Trump, the impeachment, all the little power games going on in the background. So in the meantime, we get to see what Machiavellian machinations will present themselves. It's insightful. It's good stuff. I know it's been a long old video. And it did take quite a while to write. I think just looking on the word processor, it's nearly 40,000 words. It's taken a week or two to record the audio, and I've still, at this time of recording, yet to go through, take out bits, re-record bits where it doesn't sound so good, where I can be bothered. So obviously things have changed since the start of the recording. And a quick update for reference. Of course, we all know by now that Trump has now de-escalated in Iran, Iraq. And his rhetoric has switched to sanctions and talk of leaving the Middle East. It seems that someone's been able to explain the situation to him, likely Gina Haspel, director of the CIA. And, we talked about how nicknames get a stain on a reputation or carry a reputation, her nickname being Bloody Gina. Interesting, isn't it? 600 years later after Machiavelli, and it's the same old shit. I've said it before. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it rhymes. Star Wars, Ring Theory, whatever. It's comical. Also, since the time of writing and recording, Iran has stated it was responsible for shooting down a passenger jet. And one more thing, the public is largely defined, it seems to me, by what they don't know. That's another matter for the Prince, keeping the private and public sides of the equation necessarily separate. So the public has no provenance or no business in the private side of things. So private affairs should not be disclosed. It's a commingling thing. I kind of really want to emphasize that. It's not that it's kind of discretionary. It's not a choice. It's that it cannot be commingled. It's kind of like a trustee descendant thing. Again, going a bit off track. But the point is, remember, people are motivated more by what they fear. And this is the point of keeping private and public separate, because it's what the public don't know that is what they fear. And, I'm trying to think of some studies to quote, but it doesn't come to mind. It's like people would rather know that they're going to incur a severe penalty than not know what the penalty is, but that they're going to get one, even if the penalty is less than. In other words, they'd rather know that they're going to have a hefty fine to pay than know that there's going to be some punishment in the future, but they don't know when or how much. To me, that always seems to be the philosophy of call and put options, is that you're paying a premium to lock in any of the known quantity with unlimited upside, but you lock in your downside, so at least you know what the maximum loss is going to be. And of course, you pay a premium for that, which is negotiated up front. Going back years and years ago, I used to read these little plaques when I was a youngster. Investment in knowledge pays the best returns. So I've invested a lot in knowledge. I know a few things, read a lot, but the saying or the quote doesn't say for who knowledge pays the best returns. Of course, it's how you apply the knowledge, but the control of knowledge as well, propaganda and all that, and what you decide to tell people when, is also of all that kind of good stuff. Also, I know I've mentioned the Myers-Briggs. I've kind of introduced that a little bit, and my claim to being a kind of INTJ type. Just for clarity, I don't hold too much faith in these kinds of things. It's from my knowledge, it's something that Carl Jung was working on, and he started with 8 types, and then Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers added another 8 categories for shits and giggles, published their book, no scientific grounding whatsoever. But of course, that's how it got started, and from what I'm gathering, things have improved. Myers-Briggs method have had a lot added to it. It's been refined. I don't know specifically whether it makes any claims about predictive capability. I know, again, it's like a lot of people jump on these things and use it to sell something else for which it was not designed. So you see all these tests online, and then from the personality type, a lot of people will sell the list of industries, sectors, businesses and jobs that are going to suit that kind of person. My understanding is that the Myers-Briggs it's a nice 4-letter digit code. It's a compact device to convey a concept very quickly in a compact way, but I don't think they make claims about any kind of predictive capability. For me, the great thing about it is in its description of 16 types, it describes 16 ways of seeing the world, 16 different ways of understanding internal and external perceptions, 16 different ways of how we filter incoming information and how we process outgoing information. And so for me, it really opened the eyes, and it's like, the temptation is to say, oh, this person doesn't process information like me. They don't understand like me. They're fucking crazy. And I think if you go back to earlier podcasts that I recorded, I might even have said a couple of times, oh, that's fucking crazy. Oh, they're crazy. And it's just really what's being expressed there is the fact that I don't understand how these people work, therefore irrational. And just realizing that people don't have the same perceptions, same internal structures, or even the same filters on things. Makes us stop and realise that instead of just reacting, oh, they're crazy, and then we make a judgment, and then we can rush to impose some kind of label on them, and then create this kind of mental distance between them and us, and the next thing you know, we have contempt for them, and then we know what follows. Instead of doing that, we can stop and say, let me think about the information they've presented. What must be their perceptions of the world, and how can I interact with that in a way that gets us both where we want to go? It's a response rather than a reaction. Then, of course, it's a little bit of like the max factor thing we talked about a few episodes ago, where this chap, he had his device to measure skull sizes and feature sizes and proportions, and basically just computed the average of everyone. And then he invited all these celebrities to come along and have their skull measured, and beauty was defined as some kind of deviation from the average. And then if you came in with measurements that were below average, I mean, whatever metric or vector or direction we're considering, he could sell you some kind of powder or blusher that distracted from that perceived deficiency to make it look like you conform to what the defined standard of beauty was. Now, you might argue that's a scam, but that seems to be everything in the world. There's these other guys that go on Facebook doing the same thing. So they'll say something like, no, they'll propose a social contract. Okay, if I can predict a number that you're thinking of, then I want you to share this video. So you enter that social contract, and because, of course, we're all honourable, we end up sharing this guy's video, and it goes viral. And it basically says something along the lines of, take your age, add 10, times by 4, then divide by 2, take off 10, and multiply by 5. I probably haven't balanced the equation there, but really what it's asking you to do is think of your age, add 10, take away 10, and hey presto, you got your age. Therefore, wow. And it's like, well, yeah, of course, because you're doing a balanced equation, of course it's going to end up with what you started. Obvious, but people don't see it. Oh wow, that was amazing. And all of a sudden 3 million views later. So in terms of the Myers-Briggs personality types, I think it's a useful tool. I don't hold too much stock in it. That is what you are. It's a parlor trick. And as long as people believe it, it can be leveraged, placebo effects kind of thing. Even Carl Jung himself said everyone or every individual is an exception. Just wanted to explore this a bit more. So I'm going to go into a bit of another ramble. But so this is for illustration. It's conjecture. It's an anecdote to illustrate a point. So don't take it as gospel. It's my presupposition that people's actions and behaviours are driven by their values and beliefs. Their beliefs can be changed in any manner of ways, like branding of a particular product, or propaganda, or something more direct like hypnosis, or something more subtle. Over time, we associate values and beliefs about the brand. This exercise takes time and money, probably why so many brands spend a lot of money. On a personal level, a practitioner will ask you to imagine doing something in a new way or a context that reframes your inner values and that alters your belief about yourself or the situation, and you can see how this is useful. I mean, think of any kind of story with a twist in it that shifts your moral perspective. Rashomon effect, as more information comes to light, it's like, the guy tearing down the motorway in his sports car, and you think, what an arsehole. But actually, his kid's in the passenger seat having anaphylactic shock and he's on the rush to hospital. Now that you know that information, kind of changes your perspective on things. Yeah, there's hundreds and hundreds of these stories to do the rounds, but that's the point. It changes your perspective now that you have new information. It changes the meaning of the experience. So that's like a really fast reframe. You can imagine a very similar process where a practitioner asks you to relax, kind of relax your frame of mind, relax your grip on what you believe to be reality, and go down deeper and deeper into a relaxed state, and the practitioner starts to give you deep layers of suggestion that your unconscious may or may not accept. One's called hypnosis, the other has the label of reframing or conversational change therapy, and even jokes can change our perspective, and I think jokes and humour are fabulous because they have that little brain reward of dopamine, that we've made a connection, that we've seen something in our minds that has been connected in a new way with a twist of irony that has a payload of some kind of new information. It's probably why we like jokes, or the punchline, or the twist. And there's the trick. It's to catch off guard the conscious mind. And the conscious mind is kind of skittish. It has all these filters. But if we can find a way to relax it, to bypass it for a practitioner, that's building trust, rapport, all that good stuff we keep hearing about. So we don't say, right, I'm going to hypnotize you and change your mind, too abrasive, too direct, too disrespectful. We're not acknowledging that the other person has these filters there for a good reason. We're just trying to bulldoze our way through it. And this is the thing about trust. We start small. We tell people what they already know. A rational person can't really disagree with that. We meet them where they are. It's kind of like a respectful approach. Same with the pattern of hypnosis. We start with something we know about the person. If they're sat in a chair, as you sit there in the chair, it's undeniable experience. And then we start to lead them, just relax, and we can say, that's right, take a deep breath in as we see their ribcage lift. And then you can just breathe out whenever you're ready. Of course, they can't hold their breath forever. They're going to breathe. That's right. And now as you take your next breath in, I want you to imagine. And you kind of then start leading them. So you've always got to start with pacing their undeniable real experience. Another way to influence people is by authority, where they've already had their filter bypassed and attached directly to the authority figure. They trust the authority figure. There's no kind of filters that will reject information from their beloved authority figure. You believe the authority figure is infallible. Good. Well, authority figure, who you trust completely, says you must do X, Y, Z, or authority figure wants you to know ABC is bad for you. Or ABC authority figure thinks that you shouldn't vote for shady shitlord. No evidence required. No further investigation required because the trusted authority said it. It's accepted without question. Another way to do it is to take the online test, because this is self-administered, and if you can't trust yourself, who can you trust? So it's a very honest test. Of course, there are lots of online tests that exploit this because they know that most people aren't honest. And that's one of the criticisms of the Myers-Briggs test, because it's self-administered. Some people say it's unreliable, but then what is it that's unreliable? Because it's more or less the same questions that are being asked. But if the same questions are being answered differently by the same person, well, why is it that the same person's responding differently? Has something changed? Were they imagining a different answer than last time? Or are they not really sure? So then this is where the ambiguity comes in. But let me assign some letters to your personality traits, and then let me tell you a few things that are in common with this trait, because they are common traits. You are convinced that you are an INTJ or whatever. And now that you're convinced because these traits match up with the personality types that you've told somebody that you have, now you're convinced when I say things like INTJ's strengths are XYZ and their weaknesses are ABC, which you pick up on because weaknesses, fear, possibly I can be exploited, I've got chinks in my armour. Yeah, that threat side of things, and you've accepted the threat and the premise without resistance because it was a self-administered test. Smooth. And of course, the website says, successful and wealthy people play to their strengths, the same as you have, but are often undone or hampered by their one weakness. And you're left to fill in the blank. Of course, the website has a course for that one weakness. It's bypassed a critical question, jumped straight to a threat, and you have now internally identified, because personality is identity, of course, and now I can sell into that. Yeah, so the amazing Randy's got great videos about this kind of forecasting, cold reading, what do they call them, Barnum statements, rainbow ruses. Well, you have a room full of people, they get their personality profile individually, they then read it, they agree that it describes them to a T, and then he invites the room to swap each other's personal profiles, and of course they're all the same. So I'm trying to get to a subtlety here. There's like the first order of things, the obvious layer, is the proposition that we have a preferred rep system, that some of us are visual, some of us are more auditory, some of us are, or the presupposition that there is actually a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. Again, it's another useful framework. I don't know whether it's necessarily true. Some people say that we have 4 personalities inside of us. I don't know whether that's true, or that the Myers-Briggs types really are types. I don't know whether that's true. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. And I think, John Grinder expressed it. I was in the room when he said it. All this NLP stuff, all these models, all these presuppositions. It's a fiction. It's a useful fiction. Even Bandler is, the other co-author of NLP said, it's an hallucination. And all you people are interacting with my hallucination. And sometimes that produces useful effects. It's because we accept the presuppositions that the second order of things can have its effect. So we end up in this kind of weird, dicey situation where we're telling white lies to effect useful change. Is there really a conscious, unconscious mind? Is there really defined personality types? Is there really a preferred rep system? Well, kinda, sorta, just enough to convince people, yeah. And then, because you are that type, this is what you need to have, do, or change about yourself. Oh, is it? Yeah, of course it is. That makes sense. And they believe it. Now, is it a ruse? Is it a parlour trick? Do people really have all these different internal filters? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the point is that the benefit I found is that if it makes us stop and think, this person has a different model of the world than I do. How can I respond into that rather than imposing mine on them, which they're just going to reject? It's this kind of small difference that makes the big difference. It's not what you've said, it's just you've reframed it in a way that the other person finds it more accessible. I suppose this is the lesson in all this. The phenomenon of changing people's internal representations and values and meanings has lasting effect. Some people believe in hypnosis and will be receptive to that approach, though fundamentally it's the same thing as being told by an authority in which you have blind and absolute faith that this is actually what you ought to believe, and that event was God's way of making you grow, or actually it's your personality type, or whatever it is. These are all like the levers of moving things around. But here's the second order of things. Now that we know about rep systems and MBTIs and all the other jazzy things, oceans and socionics and communication methods, internal rep systems, submodalities, metafilters and all that good stuff. Now we're educated. Mm-hmm. And we think, okay, now I can be an excellent communicator. It makes us better communicators. Suddenly, because we want to be excellent communicators, we start listening to people like we've never listened before. Maybe at first it's just a novelty to see what kind of MBTI they are, or whether we can spot their preferred rep system. And it kind of adds extra care in our responses to match what we think another preferred rep system is from someone else. The point is, the rep system's irrelevant. It's a bit of a red herring, but it's got us to pay attention to people and to be more considered in our response. And again, the outcome and the means rather than the reaction. And the other point that I'd like to make is, and I keep saying we're going to get to Dave Grossman's book on killing, where he talks about the way to condition people to kill is to create mental distances, cultural distance, social distance, even mechanical distance, like going from a knife, which is quite up close and personal, to a gun, which is a bit further away, and you don't get to see the horrors to a nuclear bomb, which in essence is just a button. It makes it a lot easier. And it struck me when I was reading about these Myers-Briggs personality types and the internal structures, like internal filters, external filters, internal sensing, external sensing, all these kind of, thinking internally, judging, perceiving, that it occurred to me that there's a network of distance. In the Myers-Briggs, there's these 8 cognitive spectra, and it's all about defining how we gather information and how we make decisions. And so the subscripts denote whether we're kind of internally processing information or using external markers to process information, whether we internally make decisions or whether we use external markers to go with decisions, or internal, external thinking, internal sensing, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't really matter. Point is that there seems to be matched pairings. So where we may be, for example, I don't even know what this means, but say we're internally sensing something, we're aware of our internal feelings about something. It may not occur to us to check with everyone around us, because our preferred way of dealing with the world is to go by what we internally conclude. Other people are external in this approach, and they will go to the crowd to see what they think to make a decision. So you can see, for example, how it might be useful for someone who has morals very low down in their priority to actually learn to check with the crowd, is this a moral thing to do? So you can see how these partnerships start to spring up. And what I further gather from these models, it's kind of like, again, it's my perception, my take on it, it's just an anecdote, but what it seems like is, the brain uses a lot of calories to make decisions or to do processing. So evolution, tries to get by on the least amount of calories that's used for any particular endeavor. So when we're young, we might learn one of these processing systems, like using our internal judgment to make decisions. But to do an internal judgment, then stop and think, let me do an external judgment. Now that's 2 processings. And now that I've got 2 pieces of data that may actually be in conflict, I now need a third way to resolve the difference or the conflicts. That's 3 sets of processing I needed to do. Whereas if I'd only just gone on my internal thoughts and feelings, I only need to do 1. But we might get really good at just doing internal processing, and it might not occur to us to check with the crowd or go to an external processing. So that one skill gets really well developed. And if we just stay in the contexts or environments where having that one internal processing is suited, we start making good decisions to the context of the environment we're in. You can see now how the Dunning-Kruger curve comes about, because when we're young, we really are just in one kind of 17, 18 social modeling. We go out to nightclubs, we do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and we get good at making those decisions. But then when we get out into the bigger world where we need to do these things like go out to check with crowds or resolve conflict, because we believe that we're good at making decisions because we've been doing it the last 5 or 6 years in a very narrow niche environment. We take that out there and we think, yeah, I'm good at making decisions because I've only really been making simple ones, but we think they're complex because it's only at the edge of our experience at the time. This is why we get the notion of primary and secondary processes. The tertiary and subsequent processes are much lower down in our hierarchy. We've learned to solve problems using the first and second approaches. The third and fourth aren't so well developed, let alone 5, 6, 7, and 8. We barely ever use them. And this is the point. It's never even occurred to ourselves that we might have this kind of hierarchy in our mind. We don't even know our own preferences or our optimal or preferred processing strategy. So consider then when we interface with others, what a shit show, because we think it should just work because we've learned this works for us and we might just assume that's how everyone else does it. And then it gets messy and we misunderstand and we blame because we start to make judgments. You're wrong, you're inferior, you're stupid or deficient or broken or retarded because, of course, according to this strategy that I don't know that I'm using internally, this is the obvious answer. How can it not be? When the truth is that we just don't understand each other. And once we realise we're interfacing with an aspect of a human nature that our interlocutor didn't necessarily choose, they may have grown up using a different internal processor for whatever reason, nature, nurture, who knows, suddenly we can become much more compassionate and careful with our communication. Yes, it takes a lot more mental energy, and that's the thing. Because now we might take care to translate our outputs to match their inputs. Since they are not yet aware of what's going on, it's up to us to do the heavy lifting, and it can be draining. I've said before about the thingies. Drives me nuts. So then, okay, we get back to the question, is this manipulation? Yes, all social interaction is. There's always an impact, whether it results in confirming the effectiveness of that strategy or realizing it didn't work or whatever. You cannot not be changed by it, even if only slightly. Just listen to me ramble on for 5 hours. You've formed opinions about things, might have been exposed to new ideas. It might just be a small or it might be a big one. Who knows? Depends where you are in life. But, I'd like the word manipulation in a neutral way. Could be good, could be bad, could be truth, could be falsitives, could be good, could be evil. And yeah, this is very much the ends justify the means stuff, because if we know what type of person we're interfacing with, we can assume a kind of matching type that makes persuasion much more likely. Why would you choose to make that process any more difficult or costly in terms of time and literal brain calories for both parties? Surely knowing this and using these techniques to advantage makes us more efficient, better, gooder, less evils. Yeah, so it's my observation, people like people who are like themselves, and I think it's likely more true to say that people prefer to be with people and interact with people whereby the needs can get met in the lowest cost way. And when I say lowest cost, again, meaning time and calorie burn in the brain. If people just get us and we can communicate and we understand them, much more preferable to being with somebody who constantly gets the wrong end of the stick, constantly thinks different to us, and we have to explain every detail and go over the minutiae again, and they still don't get it. And likewise, and they're communicating with us, we just don't get them. They're talking thingies. So again, it comes back to distance, which is the kind of point of this diversion. As Machiavelli said, it's easier to acquire states that speak the same language and have the same culture. And I'm wondering now if this also applies to state of mind. That it's easier to reach agreement and build things with people where the mental distance between those cognitive processes are the shortest, topologically, and some pairings naturally go together and some, it seems, repel like a magnet. So the way I'm starting to view it is our particular combination of internal-external processing has some kind of squidgy shape or an equation or whatever, however you want to represent it, cloud. Somebody else's will have a different shape, different cloud, different network. And then when we try and communicate across this network, some networks are naturally going to fit together and be very streamlined and have efficient pathways. Others are going to be like a real jumbled network where every line crosses because they're trying to match, their external thinking with our internal thinking or their internal sensing with our external sensing. And it's either going to flow or that's going to create huge crosstalk. So, Francis Bacon said it, go and travel. Machiavelli says it, when you've seized or annexed land or state, go and live there for a while. So yeah, try and work out how other people think. Try that on. Maybe it'll develop some of our own internal skills, or maybe it'll give us better insight into how other people think. So what am I trying to convince you of? So without any substantiation, I'm kind of putting it out there as a bit of woo-woo. I'm going to make the claim that these personality types, or processing, internal, external, judging, perceiving, many routines or functions, if you like, form to make a mental framework. They interact, they're many different processes, all wound up in different measures. Like we have distances in religious belief or cultural beliefs. Again, we've talked about Hofstadter's cultural distance index. I think we also have personality distance. So rather than just rejecting it or pushing it away, it suddenly becomes a challenge to find out how we can narrow that distance. What does this mean? It means, if it means anything at all, if there really are different personality types, different processing styles, we have to get used to adopting different ones. In essence, learning a new language, a new way of thinking about things. I guess it's hard work, but this seems easier than insisting the whole world comes to our way of thinking. That's never going to happen. What also seems to extend from this model is that we have these cognitive functions that we seem to apply in order of preference and cost benefit. But sometimes we just don't have the right internal strategies to obtain that preferred outcome. We get frustrated or thwarted, so we try our second best strategy, and that gets no further. If the first best strategy didn't get it, how's the second best going to work? When that fails, we try with the lesser and lesser competences or skill sets. Of course, this is overly simplistic, I suspect. If anything at all, it's probably a combo that we won't necessarily just use our first best strategy, but some kind of intertwined combination according to the situation. But I suspect, from kind of like the way I'm starting to see it, it's a bit like the choosing beggars, made fun of online. They start out nice, pleasant. They ask questions, straightforward. And then when they get rejected or rebuffed, they attack the other person. And when the counter offer is rejected, then they try insults. And when that fails, then they try contempt. And when that fails, they win by enacting kind of mock violence, summed up by, well, fuck you then, or I didn't want it anyway. The pattern seems to fit. I'm not saying it's just an observation. So yeah, when our internal diplomacy fails, as it were, we get frustrated and angry. And on top of this, we're now in a situation that we're incapable of solving, which makes the whole situation worse, and the options are exhausted. And this is when diplomacy fails, albeit internal, external, individual, or group. And the only option is war. Then we go on missions of vengeance. And then, when we're kind of in the red mist rage, collateral damage isn't a factor, because we're now using the strategy of last resort. Careful calculations of cost-benefit, risk analysis, they're waived. Red mist intensifies. And in that fit of fury and anger and violence, rational thinking goes out the window. So even the idea of being restrained in violence is very, very difficult. So yeah, a little bit of caution. As I say, the first order of things, the first order being those questions that are asked online, all those surveys. Tell me how you do things. And then the report at the end says, hey, this is how you do things. And we're surprised at the apparent accuracy. And then we start buying into it because it's past our convincer filters. But, objective testing shows it's not a reliable instrument for diagnosis prediction, or necessarily even reliable, of course, because it's a self-administered test, online results, different mileage out of it. Plus, also like any cure-all, that it's now been bastardized and misrepresented and crowbarred into places it doesn't belong, so yeah. But the second order that I take from it is, as I've kind of suggested, is people are different with different capabilities, different priorities, different preference for sorting data, filtering data, and processing data. And to this, I think my moral injunction is to at least respect it, accept it, even if we don't agree with them. In a sense, it's about the journey, going those distances, narrowing those distances culturally, socially, mentally. That said, then, question remains, ends or the means. So yeah, knowledge pays the best returns for those who control it. A public who is ignorant about certain aspect, say of all affairs, who just don't see the hidden hand, they're focused on the first order and they don't see the second order, will attribute to the unknown dark forces, malevolent, evil. And we all know what needs to happen to evil, because that great authority in the sky, that good book, what every redemptive myth has taught us, it must be destroyed. See, says the war-hungry politician, the will of the people, want them folk over there destroyed. Who are we to argue with the will of the people? Again, it's the appeal to that mysterious, ethereal, nebulous, the people. Well, point to them. Can you put the people in a wheelbarrow? What other myths, then, are we following? Napoleon Hill. the lone genius myth, the likes of Nikola Tesla, the big pharma myth, the myth of the lone man with a gun, the low-fat diet myth, the ostrich head in sand myth, the lightning strikes twice myth, take your pick. There seems to be a common theme, though, about these myths. They seem to be based around some notion that has as a necessary negative consequence for which the myth has some comforting factor, like the archetype of a saviour from heaven, a Superman, or the saviour of artificial intelligence that seems in vogue right now. If only we can resurrect Jesus, if only the second coming, if only we can get AI working. It's kind of comforting in a way. It lets us off our own anxiety a bit because now we have the perfect adjudicator. It can have complete knowledge. It can make the perfect decision. The presence of the saviour relieves us of the anxiety and complexity of making the decision. We can also absolve ourselves of the responsibility because it was, of course, saviour that told us to do it. Probably why the myths survive. Heuristics. And I know it's a different topic, but all those amazing miracle health cures that your doctor doesn't know about because Big Pharma and people's desperation for relief, sprinkled with a few other cognitive biases, create these Lollapalooza effects that Munger talks about. Yeah, I'm sure you've come across those online, long-form infomercials. You know, the ones that start with a question and then pace your current experience, a hypnotic induction, match current undeniable experience. Those who don't agree get filtered out, and if people keep listening, you'll know that they are of a particular type, so you can tell them that, and they start to relate and identify, and you've hooked them. Then you need to salt them a little bit, handle early objections, state their weakness and fears, and show them how the cure is just a click away. Well disposed, attentive, and receptive. We're branding our message, slowly persuading, playing into their cognitive receptors. We're probing for our way in. What's the chink in their armour? What do they want to believe as true? What do they believe is good? What logically is compelling? Fucking hell, it's a good job I'm too freaking lazy to do this shit. Until next time.